Yo, something is shifting right now, and it's subtle. It's not loud headlines, it's not indictments, it's not perp walks. It's something far more dangerous in 2026. It's pressure. Because every time Jeffrey Epstein's name resurfaces, every time another batch of documents trends, every time elite power circles get dragged back into the spotlight, Oprah Winfrey's name somehow starts floating back into the conversation. Not as a defendant, not as someone charged with anything, but as a symbol. And when 50 Cent starts reacting to that symbol, people pay attention. This isn't the same playful trolling he does with rappers. This isn't petty industry back and forth. There's a different energy here. It feels strategic. It feels measured. It feels like he sees a cultural shift happening before most people do. Because 50 doesn't operate emotionally when it comes to power. He studies it. So let's slow this down and unpack what's actually going on here. When thousands of pages connected to Epstein were re-released and recirculated online, the internet didn't respond with legal analysis. It responded with detective energy. People weren't reading context. They were scanning for names. They were zooming into contact lists. They were highlighting email threads. And any recognizable figure mentioned anywhere in those materials instantly became trending. Oprah's name appeared in some correspondence. Now, that fact alone does not equate to criminal involvement. Being mentioned in documents, especially within elite social and philanthropic networks, is not proof of wrongdoing. That distinction is critical. But social media doesn't operate on courtroom standards. It operates on optics, and optics are emotional. Oprah is not just a celebrity. She is one of the most culturally influential media figures of the last 3 decades. She built an empire on credibility, empowerment, moral authority, and truth-telling. She positioned herself as a voice that calls out injustice, uplifts survivors, and defines ethical boundaries in public conversation. So when her name appears anywhere near an elite corruption storyline, even peripherally, people don't process it legally. They process it psychologically. There's a clash between expectation and association, and that clash creates tension. Now enter 50 Cent. His history with Oprah goes back years. In the early 2000s, when he was dominating hip-hop, he wanted access to platforms that represented mainstream validation. Appearing on Oprah wasn't just about publicity, it was about cultural certification. It meant you weren't just a rapper anymore. You were accepted by a broader America. But Oprah had publicly expressed criticism towards certain themes in hip-hop at the time. She distanced herself from artists whose music she felt promoted violence or negativity. That included 50. He didn't take that quietly. He publicly criticized her audience. He framed the situation as gatekeeping. He leaned into the narrative that powerful platforms decide who gets elevated and who gets excluded. That tension became part of his mythology, and 50 has always been extremely aware of power structures. He doesn't just care about fame, he studies leverage. He watches who controls narratives. He pays attention to who gets protected and who gets sacrificed when public opinion turns. Fast forward to now, the world has changed. Public trust in institutions has eroded dramatically. Every time a powerful man falls, Weinstein, Cosby, R. Kelly, Diddy, the public doesn't just focus on the accused. They ask broader questions. How did this go on so long? Who knew? Who stayed silent? Who benefited? Who was in the room? Even if there is no proof of complicity, the question itself radiates outward. It doesn't stay contained. That's the cultural climate 50 is reacting to. Epstein wasn't just a criminal, he was a connector. He had access to billionaires, politicians, scientists, royalty, tech CEOs, philanthropic institutions. After his 2008 conviction, he still managed to move within elite circles. That's what unsettles people. How does someone convicted of crimes involving minors continue to attend dinners, fund research initiatives, meet with powerful figures? That question isn't limited to one person. It applies across industries. Universities accepted donations. Scientists attended conferences. Business leaders held meetings. Media figures existed in overlapping spaces. Oprah, because of her global philanthropic and media presence, exists within that broader ecosystem of influence. That doesn't mean involvement in crimes, but it does mean adjacency to power. And in 2026, adjacency to power is enough to create suspicion. 50 understands this dynamic deeply. He knows that reputations rarely collapse overnight because of one document. They shift because perception changes. He knows that once public trust fractures, narratives evolve quickly. Right now, the narrative isn't Oprah committed crimes. The narrative forming online is about elite insulation. It's about who appears untouchable. It's about who gets dragged aggressively and who seems to remain steady. When law firm chairs step down after emails surface, when billionaires issue clarifications, when public figures lose endorsements, and another equally powerful figure remains publicly composed, the public perceives imbalance, and imbalance breeds narrative. But here's the nuance that often gets lost. Elite ecosystems overlap constantly. Philanthropy intersects with politics. Media intersects with business. High-level events bring together individuals from multiple sectors. Being in the same room, appearing in contact lists, or sharing social circles does not equal participation in wrongdoing. The human brain, however, is wired to detect patterns even when patterns are coincidental. We seek symmetry. We seek narrative closure. Epstein's death, officially ruled a suicide, left a psychological vacuum. There was no full televised trial naming everyone publicly. There was no cinematic resolution. That absence of closure fuels speculation. Some commentators speculate about intelligence ties or hidden financial leverage networks. None of those theories have been officially confirmed, but the mystery element remains, and mystery fuels suspicion. Oprah, as a symbol of elite access and institutional influence, becomes part of that larger conversation, even without charges or evidence of criminal conduct. 50 doesn't need to accuse, he just needs to highlight the shifting mood. He senses when the public begins questioning gatekeepers rather than just perpetrators. This isn't about a specific indictment, it's about a broader cultural shift where moral authority itself is under scrutiny. For decades, Oprah's brand was built on clarity and empathy. In a distrust era, clarity gets questioned, authority gets examined. Even long-standing reputations are reevaluated through the lens of elite proximity. That doesn't automatically imply guilt. It reflects a society that no longer grants automatic trust. If you strip away the names, remove Oprah, remove 50, remove Epstein, what remains is a culture that suspects power structures by default. People no longer wait for convictions before forming opinions. They react to associations. They react to silence. They react to who appears insulated. And 50, as someone who built his brand as an outsider navigating powerful systems, positions himself as someone willing to question insulation. He understands that in a media climate driven by perception, the phrase "on the run" doesn't necessarily mean fleeing law enforcement. It can mean reputations scrambling to stay ahead of public doubt. So when he signals that pressure is rising, he's not predicting indictments, he's reading the room. He sees how quickly the internet shifts from curiosity to certainty. He sees how elite names trend without formal accusations. He sees how proximity alone can alter perception. And that's why this conversation feels bigger than a feud. It's about trust. It's about how quickly moral authority can be questioned in a world where document drops, social media amplification, and viral speculation intersect. The real story isn't whether someone is next legally, it's whether public trust is next to collapse. And in 2026, that collapse doesn't require a courtroom. It requires doubt. So the question becomes, is this healthy scrutiny of elite ecosystems, or are we witnessing pattern paranoia fueled by distrust? Because the line between those two is thinner than ever. Here's the part nobody is saying out loud. 50 Cent doesn't treat everyone the same. He trolls rappers for sport. He clowns actors for entertainment. He jokes about scandals for engagement. But when it comes to people he views as structural power, his tone shifts. And Oprah, to 50, isn't just a celebrity. She represents structure. There's a difference between a powerful entertainer and a cultural gatekeeper. A rapper can dominate charts and still be disposable. An actor can win Oscars and still be replaceable. But a gatekeeper controls pathways. They decide who gets narrative redemption. They decide which voices feel legitimate. They decide what conversations become mainstream. In the early 2000s, Oprah represented that level of influence. And 50 didn't just want fame, he wanted legitimacy. When he didn't get it from her platform, it wasn't just rejection. In his mind, it was a signal about how power works. That experience shaped him. So when Epstein's name resurfaces and elite proximity becomes a topic again, 50 doesn't view it through the lens of crime. He views it through the lens of structure. Who had access? Who controls access? Who survives access? That's a different conversation. Most people treat scandals like explosions. Something happens, someone falls, the story ends. 50 treats scandals like stress tests. When a stress test hits the system, weaker pillars crack first, but the strongest pillars don't collapse immediately. They absorb pressure, and that's what he's watching. He's watching which reputations bend and which remain rigid. There's something else here that's more subtle. In hip-hop culture, authenticity is currency. If someone is perceived as fake, insulated, or protected by connections, the culture rejects them. In mainstream media culture, polish is currency. If someone is composed, institutional, and strategically silent, they're seen as professional. Those two worlds operate differently. 50 comes from a world where silence can look suspicious. Oprah comes from a world where silence can look strategic. That cultural mismatch is why this dynamic feels electric. When Epstein's name trends and Oprah's name trends beside it, 50 doesn't have to accuse. He only has to highlight contrast. He knows his audience interprets silence differently than daytime television audiences do. And here's the uncomfortable reality. The public doesn't actually know how elite networks operate behind closed doors. Now here's the deeper question. Are we witnessing healthy scrutiny of power structures? Or are we watching a society so distrustful that proximity alone becomes enough to damage reputations? Because the answer to that question determines what happens next. Not for Oprah specifically, but for every legacy figure operating at the top of influence. And that's where the story truly lives. Not in documents, not in speculation, but in the ongoing collapse of automatic trust. That's the era we're in. And 50? The question isn't whether Oprah is guilty of something. The question is whether cultural immunity even exists anymore. And if it doesn't, nobody at the top is as safe as they think.